New details have emerged about the United States special operation in Venezuela to detain the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife. In particular, the Venezuelan opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, stated that they are ready to take power into their own hands with the support of Washington, of course, and called on Venezuelans to prepare for a change of power and to await further instructions from the opposition. At the same time, the American military stated that the arrest of Nicolas Maduro was made possible by a recruited CIA agent directly within Nicolas Maduro's government. It's still unclear if this person got the $50 million the State Department promised for Maduro's capture. But nevertheless, it became obvious that yes, indeed, it was insiders from Maduro's regime who betrayed him. This essentially explains why neither the army nor the military nor Nicolas Maduro's security made any attempt to prevent his arrest. At the same time, Donald Trump published the first official photo of Nicolas Maduro under arrest. And it looks, of course, quite characteristic. Basically, it looks like Nicolas Maduro is some kind of serial criminal who is shackled and being transported on a plane. Then Trump posted videos of the military operation and later gave a speech. Well, in general, that's how the puzzle is coming together so far. But in this episode, I want to draw your attention to what I believe are the real goals of this entire operation. And they are actually not about arresting Nicolas Maduro. That's not the ultimate goal. And after all, the United States special operation in Venezuela is first and foremost a domestic political issue for Washington, and the strategic goal of this operation is not Venezuela, not Maduro, but Cuba. Since the end of the Cold War, Venezuela has become for Cuba something like what China is for Russia today in terms of sanctions, logistics, and energy. And essentially, these two countries depend on each other. And a long time ago, Marco Rubio stated that if Maduro's regime is overthrown, it would be much easier to put an end to the communist regime in Cuba. That's why in this episode we'll talk about the situation more strategically. Well, I'll leave some operational statements for my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description, so be sure to check it out and subscribe because we post breaking news there as it comes in. My name is Alexi Peachy. Let's get started, but before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like this episode and also leave your comment. This will really help promote this video in the YouTube algorithms.
We will move across the country until we can do a safe, proper, and correct broadcast. We don't want to be involved in letting anyone else in. And we have the same situation that we've had for the past many years.
So now let's go through everything step by step and quickly review the latest updates. First, Nicolas Maduro is expected to arrive in New York today, where he will be taken into custody by federal authorities. A military plane carrying Maduro is expected to land later today at Stewart International Airport in New York. And according to sources, Maduro, who is in the custody of the United States military, is expected to be handed over to federal authorities upon arrival in the country. He is expected to appear before the federal court of the Southern District of New York next week. At the same time, both Nicolas Maduro and his wife have already been charged, but not with narco-terrorism, and it is clear that he will serve his sentence in an American prison. At the same time, the Venezuelan opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, has already called on Venezuelans to prepare for the moment when they will come and take power into their own hands, of course, with the support of Donald Trump's administration. The leader of the Venezuelan opposition, Maria Corina Machado, published a statement addressed to the nation after Maduro's arrest. She writes, "Venezuelans, the time for freedom has come," and so on. I want to quote part of this address for you. "Today we are ready to fulfill our mandate and take power into our own hands. To Venezuelans who are in our country, be ready to carry out what we will soon inform you about through our official channels, and to Venezuelans abroad. We need you to mobilize, to engage governments and citizens around the world, and from this moment on to dedicate them to the great operation of building a new Venezuela. Venezuela, these are decisive hours. Receive all my strength, my confidence, and my love. Let's all stay alert and connected. Venezuela will be free," writes Maria Corina Machado. I'll just briefly remind you that she was secretly taken out of the country to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in December. Her team refused to comment on her current whereabouts, but it is known that she is fully supported by Donald Trump, and he would be glad if she became the president of Venezuela, especially since it was the opposition that won the last elections in 2024. What else is interesting is that, according to Columbia Broadcasting System News, a source in the United States Central Intelligence Agency who worked in the Venezuelan government helped the United States track Maduro's whereabouts ahead of his arrest. The source was reportedly part of an extensive network of other intelligence sources in Venezuela, and it is reported that the CIA did indeed recruit people in Maduro's inner circle so that they would essentially help detain him. I would just like to remind you that the United States government offered a reward of $50 million for information leading to Maduro's arrest. But it seemed that no one from the Venezuelan dictator's inner circle actually wanted to turn him in. But in the end, as we can see, neither the army, nor the security, nor the politicians, nor the police, no one prevented the arrest of Nicolas Maduro. And it's known that the United States Special Forces basically took him from his bed while he was sleeping with his wife. That's when he was arrested, and later on as well. Donald Trump, before speaking at the press conference, started posting on his social network Truth Social. First, he posted a video about the United States military operation in Venezuela, and then he published a photo where Nicolas Maduro is clearly on a military plane, handcuffed, and he is being transported to the United States of America. But once again, as I said at the beginning of this episode, I will cover all these operational moments on my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video, be sure to go there and subscribe. Here, for example, is a complete map of the nighttime strikes by the United States of America on Venezuela and beyond. And now I suggest we focus a bit on another aspect, on Donald Trump's strategic goal. And it wasn't a Soviet organization that said this, nor was it the arrest of Nicolas Maduro, it was Cuba. The thing is, since the end of the Cold War, Venezuela has become for Cuba something like what China is today. For Russia, regarding sanctions, energy, etc. Caracas supplied Havana with cash and oil and also subsidized the island under conditions of total economic blockade. And for example, since 2000, Venezuela and Cuba have had an agreement under which Caracas supplied Cuba with oil and petroleum products, averaging 90 to 100,000 barrels per day. According to available statistics, from 2003 to 2009, Venezuela supplied Cuba with oil and petroleum products worth a total of about $12 billion. And part of this amount, almost half, was deferred for payment over 25 years. Venezuela was basically giving oil to Cuba nearly for free, helping the Cuban communists survive. In effect, Venezuela acted as a life support system for Cuba's energy and economy. But since 2005, this role of Caracas has extended to the entire Caribbean region, when Venezuela created the Petro-Caribe Alliance. This program offers oil to Caribbean basin countries, including Cuba, on preferential financial terms. Therefore, for the United States, this also means increased influence in its so-called Caribbean backyard. Because Venezuela, just like Russia, really started distributing cheap energy resources and thus began to gain influence. The Castro regime, in turn, in exchange for this, helped Chavez, Hugo Chavez, and later Nicolas Maduro to establish intelligence agencies modeled on the Soviet school, modified by Cuba for Latin America, to train the personal presidential security and generally strengthen the military vertical in security, the Castro family's regime. With 70 years of experience in counterintelligence, elite counter-recruitment, working with the army, and most importantly managing mass loyalty under conditions of poverty. Basically, he knew how to do all this and passed all this experience on to the regime. First to Hugo Chavez, then to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. The turning point for strengthening Cuba's role in the institutional transfer of control in Venezuela was the year 2002, the attempted coup in Caracas, in which the United States Central Intelligence Agency allegedly planned to remove Hugo Chavez with the help of his inner circle. After that, the Venezuelan president concluded that the greatest threat came from his own army and Venezuelan elites, not directly from the United States. In fact, from that moment on, Cubans began working in Venezuela as a parallel security system. An extensive political monitoring system was created. The role of internal surveillance increased, as did the presence of political commissar agents and so on. This is very distantly but still very similar to the system that has been built in Iran. That is, if we remove the religious ideology, in Iran there is a separate Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is essentially accountable only to the Ayatollah regime and protects that very regime. In Venezuela, they built more or less the same structure, which protects the regime of Nicolas Maduro, and this structure was created by the Cubans. It was precisely this parallel model of power built by Havana that later allowed Nicolas Maduro to stay in power. After 2013 and 2024, despite the economic collapse, international sanctions, mass protests, and international isolation. In addition to this, the Cubans regularly sent their doctors, teachers, and other specialists to Venezuela who helped strengthen loyalty to the government among the country's poorest population. That is, in fact, the experience, knowledge, and skills that Cuba once received from Moscow, from the Soviet Union, it exchanged in Caracas for resources. This was the nature of the partnership and interdependence between these two countries and two regimes. But the main problems began precisely during the presidency of Nicolas Maduro. During his regime, estimates say 7 to 9 million citizens left the country. That's about 30% of the entire population of the country. And this was usually the most educated, the wealthiest, and the most enterprising part of the population, who hoped that after the death of Hugo Chavez, the country would begin major reforms. Maduro takes power and everyone sees what's coming. The same thing happens, just not as expected, and now today. If you visit Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and other countries on this continent, you will see an amazing and astonishing number of Venezuelan refugees there. That is, Venezuelans left their country and moved to neighboring ones. Accordingly, with such a demographic collapse which naturally affected the economy as well, a political crisis was only a matter of time, and no Cuban security hierarchy could really help anymore. Of course, this also affected Venezuela's role as a supplier to Cuba and the Caribbean countries, meaning that more resources were now staying inside Venezuela. Former partners were not receiving what was promised, which did not really contribute to unity and friendship, so in fact the alliance began to slowly fall apart. This is when the most interesting part starts. Instead of oil, drug trafficking became one of the compensatory sources of income, including as an attempt to diversify revenues and somehow balance the situation, including with neighbors. Well, after that, you already know what happened. So, what we saw today, of course, yes. First of all, these are operations in Venezuela. This is the fight against drug trafficking and so on and so on. Oil and drug trafficking are clear issues there. The Maduro regime was a key factor in Donald Trump's decision for the operation. But, as it seems to me, the root cause is still the weakening of the regime in Cuba. And it's Havana that is the ultimate target of the effect of this entire operation. By the way, the ethnic background of United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio is no coincidence. Let me remind you that he is Cuban, and Marco Rubio has long said that, listen, we need to strangle the regime in Cuba and then the regime in Venezuela will fall, or on the contrary, strangle the regime in Venezuela and then the regime in Cuba will fall. After the failed operation in the Bay of Pigs in 1961, Cuba remains a painful trauma for every United States administration, and it is precisely this trauma that rules out any direct American intervention in Cuba itself. Therefore, completely shutting off this Venezuelan artificial life support system for Cuba is probably the best thing that can be done for the further subjugation of the island. And if Trump manages to do this, before the end of his term, it will be a historic event, which will inscribe his name in huge golden letters in the American history textbook and grant him an indulgence for most of his previous sins. That's exactly why his administration is openly indifferent to what those Russians are whining about. They absolutely don't care about this issue. Mark Rubio even mocked Lavrov when, during one of the broadcasts on the eve of Christmas, he was asked, "What do you think about the Russians? Can they actually help the Maduro regime?" They expressed concern, and Mark Rubio then directly said, "Listen, yes, we don't care at all about the Russians' position. The Russians can't do anything except express concern." Looking into the camera, he says, "By the way, Sergei Lavrov, Merry Christmas. Are you planning to help the Maduro regime?" So, Washington believes that it solves problems in its own backyard, and that Russia won't get involved there at all. So, accordingly, if anyone tries to get involved, they might get slapped right away because the United States considers it their territory. Europe, that's a different question. They say, well, Europe is a separate story altogether, let the Europeans defend themselves. Friends, I'll put an ellipsis here. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.